Iran has just delivered one of its clearest messages yet to Washington. It will not implement its agreement with the United States, and it is placing the blame squarely on American violations. Here is the full breakdown. To understand why this moment matters, we need to rewind a few months first. Back on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a joint military operation against Iran that changed the entire region. In that strike, Iran's longtime supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who had ruled the country for nearly 4 decades, was killed. He was 86 years old. Iranian state media confirmed his death a day later, describing him as martyred, and the country entered a 40-day mourning period. Several senior Iranian officials were killed alongside him, and the strike was widely described as a decapitation operation aimed at Iran's top political and military leadership. In the aftermath, an interim leadership council took charge, and just over a week later, Iran's assembly of experts named Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the country's new supreme leader. At 56 years old, he inherited what many called the most serious crisis in the Islamic Republic's 47-year history, a nation at war, without its longtime leader, and facing continued military pressure from the United States and Israel. That 12-day war between Iran and Israel and the broader confrontation with the United States eventually gave way to a diplomatic attempt to cool things down. Last month, Iran and the United States signed a memorandum of understanding, a formal agreement meant to de-escalate the conflict and establish a framework of reciprocal commitments between the two countries. That agreement is now, by Iran's own account, dead. Speaking at his weekly press conference in Tehran, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei told reporters that the other side, meaning the United States, did not just fail to implement the memorandum. It violated it outright, acting against both the text and the spirit of the agreement. Baghaei said Iran responded in kind. Since Washington broke its commitments, Tehran announced that it would not implement its own. He described the situation plainly, saying it is clear to everyone what state this agreement is now in. According to Baghaei, the memorandum was built entirely on a commitment for commitment structure, not on trust. He said there was never any real sign of good faith from the American side to begin with, which is why the deal was designed so that each party's obligations were tied directly to the other's compliance. Once the United States broke its side of the bargain, according to Baghaei, it became, in his words, practically impossible for Iran to move forward with its own obligations. One of the most specific complaints coming out of Tehran centers on Clause 5 of the memorandum, which dealt with the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically important waterways in the world for global oil shipments. Iranian officials say that clause gave Iran, working in coordination with Oman and regional partners, the responsibility for managing safe passage through the strait. The agreement reportedly included a 30-day window to restore normal shipping conditions. But before that window closed, the United States launched military operations against Iran, which Tehran says undermined the entire coordinated shipping framework before it could even take effect. Iranian officials have also pointed to a broader historical grievance in all of this. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal and International Affairs, Kazem Garibabadi, told Tasnim news agency that Iran was in active negotiations with the United States when Washington's own aggressive actions violated its commitments under the memorandum, effectively ending the diplomatic track altogether. Baghaei went even further in earlier remarks, drawing a direct comparison to the 2015 nuclear deal, widely known as the JCPOA, arguing that just as the United States was the first to break that agreement years ago, it was once again the first to break this new one. Now here's where things get even more serious. In addition to declaring the memorandum effectively over, Baghaei said that all American military bases across the region remain part of what he called Iran's target bank. He stated clearly that none of the United States bases in the region have been excluded from that list. He also issued a broader warning, saying that any territory used to launch attacks against Iran, regardless of which country it belongs to, would be considered fair game for Iranian defensive measures. That is a direct signal that Iran views this not just as a bilateral issue with Washington, but as a regional one, with implications for any country hosting American forces. So does this mean the door to diplomacy is completely shut? Not according to Begui. When asked how Iran would respond if the United States requested further negotiations, especially after Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei publicly dismissed President Donald Trump's word as worthless and unreliable, Begui suggested that talks could still happen. He framed it in an interesting way, saying that just as war serves to safeguard Iran's interests, negotiation is simply another tool to achieve that same goal. In other words, Tehran isn't ruling out diplomacy on principle. It's treating both war and negotiation as two different paths toward the same national objective. Begui also revealed that mediators have continued sending proposals to Tehran, even while the hostilities continue. He did not go into detail about the substance of those proposals, but he confirmed that Qatar and Pakistan have both been acting as intermediaries between Iran and the United States throughout this period. That detail matters, because it shows that even as public statements from both sides grow more hostile, there is still a quiet diplomatic channel operating in the background. Putting it all together, here's where things stand right now. Iran considers the Memorandum of Understanding effectively dead and is placing full responsibility for that collapse on the United States. Tehran is maintaining an extremely aggressive posture, keeping American bases in the region on its list of potential targets, while simultaneously leaving the door open, even if only slightly, to future negotiations through regional mediators like Qatar and Pakistan. And all of this is unfolding against the backdrop of a region already reeling from the killing of Iran's longtime supreme leader, a new and largely untested leader in Mojtaba Khamenei, and a military campaign between the United States and Iran that, as of this week, had already reached 9 consecutive nights of strikes. This is a story that is very much still developing, and the language coming out of Tehran this week suggests that both the military and diplomatic tracks are being kept alive at the same time, for now. It's also worth stepping back and looking at how we got to this exact point over the past few weeks, because the collapse of this memorandum did not happen overnight. Earlier this month, on July 8th, Begui had already accused Washington of violating the framework of the agreement, specifically pointing to that same Clause 5 covering the Strait of Hormuz. At that point, he described the situation as a structural violation, saying the United States had effectively broken the deal through unilateral actions and acts of aggression against Iran. Just a few days later, on July 13th, Begui escalated the language further, saying the memorandum had entered what he called a crisis phase, while insisting that Iran had never been the party to break commitments first. He accused the United States of continuously violating its obligations and, in his words, mutilating the document's various clauses over the preceding weeks. By July 18th, the tone had shifted from crisis to collapse. In an interview with local Iranian media, Begui said the memorandum had been suspended entirely, again pointing back to the Strait of Hormuz clause as the central failure point. And now, just 2 days later, Iran has moved from suspended to simply not implementing it at all, a clear escalation in both substance and tone over a very short period of time. This steady drumbeat of statements shows a pattern. Rather than a single dramatic announcement, Iran has been building its public case against Washington gradually, week by week, laying out a specific paper trail of alleged violations before making its final declaration that the agreement is dead. Whether that pattern reflects genuine step-by-step frustration or a calculated diplomatic strategy to justify walking away from the deal is something analysts will likely debate for a while. Meanwhile, on the ground, the military campaign has continued in parallel with all of this diplomatic back and forth. The United States has now carried out 9 consecutive nights of strikes against targets inside Iran, with American officials saying the goal is to continue degrading Iranian military capabilities. Iran, for its part, has responded with drone attacks reaching into neighboring Gulf countries, and air raid sirens have been reported as far away as Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. None of that has stopped, even as officials on both sides continue talking about mediators and the possibility of future negotiations. That's the situation as it stands today. Make sure to subscribe for continued coverage as this story develops, and I will see you in the next one.